All right. Well, welcome back. Extremely excited for this session. It's been a thrill to get to know Phil Willburn from Workday over the last several years. And I'm joined by Corinne Taylor, the Chief Diversity Officer at Workday as well. Corinne, how are you doing? Thank you for being here. If you would, introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get an introduction from Phil.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Carin Taylor, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer for Workday. I've been doing this work for about 15, 16 years now, so I feel like I've been doing it a long time, but it's actually quite fun to be thinking about this work from a data perspective. So I'm thrilled for this conversation that I'm going to be having with Phil today.
All right. And Phil, if you would introduce yourself a bit, and then I'll get out of your way and let you two, present, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. Sound good?
Yep. Sounds good. Thanks, Al. My name is Phil Willburn. I head up our People Analytics and Insights team here at Workday over the last couple of years. And belonging and diversity has been a big focus. Thankfully, because Carin had joined us and says, we need to do something about this. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's why I'm excited to, I don't know if I twisted her arm, but I said, hey, there's a bunch of, geeky people out there who like to talk about data, and we want to help or enable success in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Carin, would you come join me for a conversation? And so that's how I think Carin was able to join us. So thanks again, Carin, for showing up here today.
And thank you for twisting my arm. It's still a little sore, but I did show up.
Thanks, Carin. Wouldn't be a Workday presentation if we didn't have a safe harbor slide to talk about the product. So here it is. But let's jump into the session today. So like we said, we're so privileged and lucky to have been able to bring in Carin for this conversation. She's been spearheading our diversity efforts for the last 3 years or so, and she's really bringing progressive ideas in the field to Workday and to the broader field. And under her leadership here at Workday, we're grateful that she introduced us to this incredible and consumable, practical, and meaningful strategy we call Vibe. And for those of you who were in our October session, we went pretty deep into the Vibe Index, a new product from Workday. And here, we're going to dive a little bit deeper to hear about where it came from, what are some of the Vibe strategies we're doing here at Workday. So let me just cover a couple of the key points that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to talk about our Vibe strategy, and who better to talk about it than Carin, right? And then we're going to talk about the origin of the Vibe Index. This has been a unique partnership between what Carin has been leading in the organization and what we've been leading here at People Analytics inside Workday. And then we're going to talk about how our partnership actually is gone. And I think, for a lot of People Analytic teams out there, that this partnership may be new to them, or they may have had some ups and downs, or they're not quite sure how to partner. And Carin and I will unpack our partnership with some lessons for everybody else. Then we're going to talk about Vibe in action, which is actually how are we taking actions and what kind of results we're seeing there. So let's talk about Vibe. Carin, you came in 3 years ago. You had some very exciting and progressive ideas. The organization really got back behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about, why Vibe was so important, and what are the kind of things that it's addressing in the broader space of belonging and diversity?
Yeah, it's a great question, Phil. So, look, Vibe was this thought that I had in my head, and it came from really my experience over the last 15 or 20 years or so doing this work. And it was really about thinking about how do we think about the entire experience that an organization or an employee can have when it comes to this notion of inclusion, belonging, and equity. And so for me, it was really thinking about how can I create something that the entire organization could could get behind, how can I also create a strategy that was relevant to every single person within our organization, regardless of where you were in the world, right? So Vibe, regardless of if you're in Dublin, regardless of if you're, a woman or a male, or it doesn't depend what your racial background is, this notion of wanting to feel like you belong and like you're included is pervasive across the board. And so I really wanted to make sure that it was something that every one of our employees could feel. And I wanted to make sure that it was globally relevant as well, because as we think about how diversity, inclusion, and equity really play out, Phil, it really is from the standpoint that diversity can mean very different things for different people depending on where you're at in the world. So making sure that it was globally relevant was also really important. And so to have a strategy that all of our employees could get behind, that everyone felt personally, was really what I wanted to strive for from a Vibe perspective. And I wanted it to be really holistic, right? I didn't want it to look at just diversity. I wanted it to be inclusive of inclusion, belonging, and equity as well.
Yeah, and what I really the Vibe in our diversity Slack channel has blown up, right? Like the people have definitely got behind that at Workday. And what I really appreciate about this, and maybe ask you to speak a little bit more about it, is that, recently I was doing a webinar with Burson Academy and Josh, and he had done some research that while 64% of people, HR leaders, executives are behind diversity, only about 14% are measured or held accountable for that. So there's some big gaps between what we've been doing and the progress we're making. So maybe, talk us through a couple of the reasons why Vibe was again brought back into into Workday, into our system.
Yeah, I think, you're hitting on a really important part here, and that is that accountability part. How we are able to measure diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity became really important. But, as we were thinking about this, there were two things that were really clear as we started getting deeper and deeper into this work. One was, how are we really thinking about approaching this work holistically? And then the other one was, how do we actually think about getting very intentional about the needles that we're trying to move? So as we looked at these two things, and if you go to the next slide, Phil, you'll see that, if I think about what we were thinking about from a diversity standpoint, for many, many years, we've been able to think about and talk about diversity, and mostly it's been from a representation standpoint, right? How many women do I have? How many people of color do I have? How many people do I have sitting in different locations? But what wasn't being included was, how do we measure things like inclusion, belonging, and equity? And how do we bring all those things under one umbrella? That was the most critical thing, because we knew that just by setting goals around diversity, we weren't actually getting to like the heart of the experiences that our employees were having. And then the second thing was this notion of going from goal setting to goal getting. And so if you move to the next slide as well, we had to really think about, it wasn't just about thinking about diversity and representation, and it wasn't just about setting those goals, because if you set the goals and you don't follow up with the other things that you need to do to actually accomplish the goals, then it actually doesn't do good just to set the goals. And this is actually one of the reasons that we don't see a huge movement on the diversity side and on the representation side, because we're not doing those additional things to move the needles in other areas as well, right? It's not just about, that leaky bucket problem that we talk about a lot, right? It's not just about bringing that talent in. It's about, how do you retain that talent also? But this notion of going from goal setting to goal getting was really important as well, because we really needed to look at not just setting the goals, but what was our strategy connected all the way to actions that needed to be taken. And that was the important part for us, is to connect, the strategy to the outcomes, to the indicators, really thinking about what needles are we really trying to move, and what intentional actions do we need to take to be able to make that happen. So looking at both of these things became really critical for us in furthering the work that we're doing from a DEI perspective.
Yeah, and it's, from my perspective, I have to say it was both exciting and a little bit scary. It's like, Carin, you come in here, it's like, for people analytics professionals, representation, it's easy to measure. It's not a hard thing. But then when you come in and say, Phil, what do we know about everybody's, whether or not they feel like they belong here, or included in everything? And what is the equity or parity in our outcomes? Then, 2.5 years ago, we were working on it. We were stuck. Like, how do we actually do that, right? And it's been a journey for us to do that. And I love that it's not only like, hey, you got to do this beyond representation. Okay, thanks, Carin, I appreciate it. And let's get to work organizationally every single day. Let's focus on this and from an organization. So maybe we can start, thinking about, okay, you had the vision of Vibe, which is great. Then we're starting to put a little bit of structure on this. Let's talk a little bit maybe about the origin of the Vibe Index as we know it, and as we covered kind of in our October session. I know I have a personal story about how I came to do it, but Carin, I can jump in with my story, and then you can correct me along the way, or you can jump in and tell me your perspective on that. Yeah.
Well, you're such a good storyteller. Let you start, and then I'll correct you along the way. And I'm sure there won't be much correcting.
All right. So this is the story as witnessed by me, and the story sometimes I tell in my head. So as you hear, Carin is very passionate about Vibe, especially inclusion, belonging, and equity for all. And as a people analytics professional, it's like, how are we thinking about this and measuring this? And I remember in a specific meeting, we were sitting when we used to be together, sitting in a room together. I kind of jested. I was like, Carin, you just want me to measure how every single person feels that they're included, they belong, and that there's equity here? And I remember you saying, yeah, Phil, go off and do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, go off and do that. And at the time, we had a really nice a Friday pulse survey, which we call Feedback Fridays. It's our best Workday survey. And we pulse 6 items related to a belonging index, right? And so we had been tracking the sense of belonging in our population over time. And I said, well, let's start there. Let's start to look at the sense of belonging. I remember coming back to you saying, hey, Carin, I can measure our sense of belonging from this belonging index, and 89% of our employees feel like they belong here. And you're like, great, Phil, but that doesn't tell me about the intersections. Let's look at the intersections of region globally. Let's look at the intersections of race and ethnicity. And let's look at that data from that perspective. And only then when you pushed me and we came back with additional insights, you're like, first of all, it was almost like a stupiphany. It was like, it was so obvious on one hand and so consumable on the other. It's like, why have we not been thinking about these intersections all along? And this is where we got to get a lot of traction. And then the last thing I remember, and then again, you can correct me along the way, is that you said, Phil, this is great on belonging, but we need to do this across all of our people outcomes. What does it mean for leadership? What does it mean for promotions? What does it mean for hiring? What does it mean for retention across all of our intersections? And at that moment, I was like, wow. Okay, I get you, Carin. I'm there. I'm going to need a little bit of time to figure out, but I get you. So that's where that's kind of the origin of where the Vibe Index happened for us inside of Workday, me and you. First of all, correct me on that story, of course you can. And second of all, it's now kind of evolved to a Workday product. Maybe talk a little bit about that journey as well.
Yeah, well, you told the story perfectly, although I'm sure I said it in a much nicer way. I didn't say, Phil, go off and do this stuff for me. I'm like, Phil, partner with me. But, it's important because this is the beauty about the partnership, right? The beauty about the partnership is that we can take both of these minds and bring them together to come up with something like a Vibe Index. And that's critical to the approach. And so I'll come back to that in a little while. But I think, just thinking about the story, you certainly told it in the right way. As it continued to evolve and our efforts continued to evolve, one of the things that was really important to your point is how do we put the employee in the center and how do we look across the employee life cycle? Because we wanted to make sure, remember, our Vibe strategy is Vibe for all, and it's about our employees, right? It's about how we want every single employee to feel. And so we needed to get deep into really understanding what those experiences were all about. And so when we think about kind of the breadth and the depth of where we really wanted to think about how we were going to be measuring parity, it was critical for us to actually do that. I think the other part too is you touched on this really quickly, Phil, but the intersectionality was important, right? We knew that we had to go kind of beneath the covers to really understand what was happening within the workforce, because as we were measuring at the highest level, let's take gender as an example, we knew the experience collectively of women, but what we didn't know is whether or not that experience was the same across different dimensions of diversity, right? Were our Asian women having the same experience as our white men? And how do you actually measure for that at those points of intersection? That's how you truly get to understanding what's the least common denominator of some of the DEI issues that you're trying to solve for, right? And so understanding that, you're in this example, understanding that your Asian women are not having the greatest experience, that having the insights and the data to be able to call that out, then allows me to specifically address the issues that are going on within that population. So when you think about equity and you think about, now what we've come up with in this Vibe Index is really thinking about how do we measure the parity across these points of intersection. If you are solving for DEI issues, you've got to get to understanding what certain populations and what they're experiencing within the workforce. And you can't just take it for granted that as your data bubbles up, that everyone's having the same experience. So the power behind the Vibe Index is really looking at that parity, but also looking at it across those points of intersection, which are just critical. And just the last thing, Phil, that I'll mention here is, from a DEI profession standpoint, this is game changing, right? These are the problems that everyone's trying to solve for. They're not trying to solve for these problems at the aggregate level. They're trying to really understand at the employee level how they solve for some of the experiences that employees are having.
Yeah, I think, what we ended up coming in with is this heat map, right? And I remember the first time I was showing it to you, you're like, wow, that's it, and we got work to do, right? There's some work to do, and what I think it represents is the lived experiences that people have in the organization, and stop doing analysis on the aggregate and start really understanding those kind of lived experiences. And I would say, we have some great customers who are using this. Some customers have 4 intersections. I know we focus on 6 here at Workday. Some customers have 28 intersections that they really say, these are the lived experiences in the organizations. Let's ensure parity and equity across these intersections. And so that really has the gambit of measuring, what's relevant inside your organization. Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really important about this too is the insights are so critical. Like, I can't stress deeply enough how important the insights are, right? It's not like, even when you look at something like the Vibe Index, right, and you get an index score, it really isn't about the index score. It's about what the insights are telling you that are going to allow you to solve for some of your challenges. So, I think the other thing is, one of the things that I've always just kind of realized is DEI is a journey, right? It really is a journey, and it's not something that we're going to solve for overnight. We're not going to reverse all the disparities that have happened overnight. And it's an ongoing and iterative process in terms of learning and evolving. And so as we have looked at, at this maturity model, which is what you're seeing here, is really looking at how do you think about that iterative process of continual growth, and going from how do you make your commitments where you're setting your goals, you're looking at your strategy, you're understanding what are some of the challenges that you need to solve for, and then you move on to drive. How do you put specific and intentional actions in place to be able to move those commitments? And then lastly, when you get to a point to where you've got this muscle going and you're continually evolving, you get to a point to where it becomes a part of how you just do business. And that's when you begin to thrive. But then you always have to go back to, well, what are new commitments and what are new actions? And then how do we continue to evolve as well? So this maturity model just really gives you a good way to kind of move through that journey of DEI.
Yeah, and I love this because it gets us away, like you said at the beginning, away from goal setting versus goal getting, right? you're going out every day. You need to get better. You don't set a target. Let's just improve representation. Let's hope we get there. We've been doing that forever. Let's go out and do this business and be broader about it. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit, Carin, because I think for at least the peers that I've been talking to in this space, it can be challenging to partner together to attack this, so to deal with this problem. And I think it's been heightened with many of the recent events that have been going on. And if you hadn't developed that kind of partnership before, I can see there's a lot of challenges. So, maybe I can ask you a couple of transparent questions here, and that maybe this would help other people along the journey. I'm just curious, like, what's your experience with people analytics supporting diversity? It could be either at Workday or from your larger history. What's worked well and what hasn't worked well? What needs to be improved in this partnership?
Well, let me start with your first question around, what's my experience been? And I'll tell you, I'll be honest, it's evolved over time. And when I first started really understanding like this notion of people analytics, and by the way, it's only been within the last probably 4 or 5 or 6 years where this notion of people analytics has really like hit us square on. But in a previous life, getting diversity analytics data was really hard because it wasn't real, and being able to use the data was hard because it wasn't real time, right? I would get a diversity report and then I would have the data right there, but then in an hour, in 2 hours the next day, the data would change, but I wouldn't be able to get more insights and analytics for another week or two because it was so strenuous in terms of running reports. And so now, and I think, and this is what I love about Workday, to be honest, and our capabilities around data is the data is real time. I have it at my fingertips to be able to react to. So if I need to look at, information today and I need to relook at it because it's changed tomorrow, I have those insights. That's a different experience than having to wait 2 or 3 weeks before you're actually going to see some data. The other thing is, previously, it was about the data. It wasn't about the insights, right? The insights are so critical to understanding the data, but to be able to pull out those stories and those key points of how we really need to think about this is really important. And you do just a phenomenal job of helping me to understand, how do I use data and how do I do it differently? You have so many more, and I would say this from a people analytics, just your profession in general, you have insights to things that I'm not even thinking about, right? You can piece together information and help me be a better business leader. And that's what I really like. But I would say, in terms of what's worked well, and I would say, when I think about you in particular, I would say the thing that probably needs to change most is probably Phil Willburn. He's kind of a strange little guy there. So, but honestly, just the insights. You are brilliant in this particular space, and the more you help us, and not even just in the DEI space, Phil, but helping us to look at people analytics across the organization is a profound game changer for us. And so I think that's really been important. I would say what needs to be improved just a little bit is more data, right? More data, more insights, solving more complex problems through the insights that you bring to me. And I'm learning as we're growing as well, right? At first, I was asking for small pieces of data that probably weren't, they were important, but they weren't really solving my business problems. Now you've educated me so much that there's so much more that we can do in this space, and having even more is, I think, where we can continue to improve.
Wow, Carin, I wasn't expecting that. I know I tried to slide you some digital currency beforehand to say, hey, in front of all of my peers, make sure that our work at Workday is going well. But I really appreciate that. I think our partnership has evolved with you. I think we were trying, both of us, we were trying to answer small questions at first, right? And what the strategy allowed us to do is to get broader and say, no, this is about everyone. And I remember this one particular time where I was doing a presentation for Workday at Workday Rising, our user conference, and was going through and preparing for this. And I kept saying, Carin's strategy and Karen's belonging and diversity stuff. And a workmate, an employee, stopped me and says, Phil, you have to stop saying this is Karen's.
Mm-hmm.
This is everyone. And it just hit me. I was like, this is for all of us. This is for all of Workday. And at that moment, I realized I am just a big advocate and a player in our diversity strategy, as you are, Carin. I mean, you're leading it, but I have to own this as well. And that was a bit transformational for me. And I think, other people analytics professionals out there, I think they have to realize they own the solution for this, or at least part of the solution for this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. Like if I were going to say, one thing about the role of people analytics, specifically within the diversity space, it would be, how do you get really close to your DEI partner and really understand what their issues are? But how do you provide, to my point, those insights that help them think about this work at a much deeper level to solve harder business challenges, and not just those surface ones. The surface ones are easy. The harder ones is what we really need to continue to solve for.
Yeah. No, appreciate it. Great. So good advice, Carin, as per usual. You like to give me public advice as well. The thing I need to fix is myself. My spouse says that and my team says that. So I think that there's a consistent message here. I want to pivot to talk about vibe in action. I know we have a couple stories. We've had the vibe strategy and we've worked with the vibe index. Maybe, where are you seeing this really play out at Workday? I know you have, you've seen a lot of things. I've also, per the feedback I've received, leaned into this myself and have seen some action as well. So why don't you, where are you seeing this play out really well here at Workday?
Yeah, I'll give you, there are many examples, but let me share one, Phil, because I think one of the things is, that is, especially this people analytics or this analytics profession, don't overlook the fact that you guys are uniquely positioned to help your businesses in so many different ways. It all starts with the data and insight. So, but I would say, let me share this one story. We, as you briefly talked about the Best Workday survey or Feedback Friday, where we get this survey and we kind of get a gauge of what the population is experiencing. Specifically within the Belonging Index, which I'm always looking at, thanks to you, we were able to you were able to help me identify that there was a pocket of our population that was not having a great experience or having a comparable experience to our other populations. And it was our Asian female population. What that did for me, though, was when you brought that information to me, it allowed me to actually take actions. And we talked about the importance of strategy to action. And so what I was able to do is take that initial data, do some additional deep dives to further understand and do some focus groups to really understand how that particular portion of our organization was feeling. And then we were able to create what we call journeys. And it's basically a path that you can take any population through within your workforce and put them on a learning journey. So we created a journey specifically for Asian women that was addressing the issues that they told us were impacting them. We then saw, after putting that journey in place and taking several of them through this process, we were then able to see a change in how they felt from a belonging standpoint. And so when it comes to like going full circle, understanding the data and the insights, putting those actions in place, measuring how the population is doing and figuring out where you're doing better, that's that whole thing around that commit, drive, thrive, iterative process where now we can go that next layer down and say, what other issues do we need to solve for our Asian female population, and how can we do that in a different way? And so for us, those insights around that population and then our ability to specifically go after it with intention was just a phenomenal example of how this process works beautifully.
Yeah, I love that example because it does speak to the insights, take some action and measure the outcome. I think sometimes we do have insights and people do try to take actions, but they don't go back and say, has this actually made a difference, right? And it reminds me of your Vibe Week that we had at Workday a couple of years ago. Again, when we were in person, we measured the sense of belonging for people who participated in it prior to participating in it. And then after participating in it, we saw 8% increase in the sense of belonging after participating in the Vibe. We're like, wow, these conversations really matter, right? They really matter.
And the other point, Phil, that you just made which was important, is when the more you do something with the data that your employees are giving you, and they can see that there's a return on the fact that you're actually doing something with the data, the more they'll offer insights and information up to you, right? And so that piece was critical too, and also say back to that population, and here's how we've changed this for you.
Yeah, and I think I have a story related to this, kind of making the data transparent and communicating it. Mm-hmm. This was, maybe a year and a half ago, about a year into the strategy, and we were measuring all our pulse survey, and I was doing some work in our Dublin, Ireland group. And, one of the trends that I saw that I picked up as doing work out there is a trend in sentiment lowering across the board. So these are some of the pulse questions. This was a previous quarter here in green. In blue, this was the current quarter. So you could see the sentiment was dropping. We had known that that office had been going through hyper growth over the past years. They were changing offices. A lot was going on. And I was asked by the kind of senior HR leader to look at some intersection of the data, say, is this true across the population, or can we look a little bit different? And we put on kind of this view of our high-performing women in Dublin, and we saw, I saw, and the team saw, there was a gap in perceptions between promotions, feedback, being treated well here. And that was, again, surprising to them. It's like, hey, sentiment's lowering, and there is a gap in one of the intersections we're focusing on. And this wasn't held in secrecy. I didn't hold this data and then give them a report and do like that. I actually briefed this in front of the leadership team. And what they did was, I thought was pretty amazing. They said, hey, look, we need to do something. So they created what we call a mini people leadership summit. They took Thanksgiving Day because the US was closed down. They brought all of the people leaders, their managers together, and they presented the data transparently to all of the groups, and even the data on the gender gap. And what they found when they did this is that many of their senior technical females stood up and started to walk them through why they think that perception gap existed in there. And because of that, they were able to take these small groups and take actions, clarifying the policies around promotions. What does it take? Highlighting the technical women in their career success, doing more investment in development. And that ended up having a big impact. Within 17 weeks of that first measurement, we see the trend inside Dublin shifting more positive compared to the time before. So it's not that long, 17 weeks, it's basically one quarter, a little less than a quarter. What was then surprising, because all of this action really started to close the perception gap between men and women, high performers there in their technical space, and they're starting to address the very needs the insights picked up, right? Mm-hmm. In what is just important about this, and there's a couple great things. Number one, they ended up winning Great Place to Work in Ireland there, and Great Place to Work for Women in Ireland. So that was huge that this was going on there, but it re-emphasizes the point that this data does exist and that you can take action. And it's not a multi-year, 20-year strategy to improve, inclusion or belonging or equity. You can do it within 2 quarters. Get this data, take some action, measure the effect of it, and continuously do that, right? And so that's something that I experienced that I think my notion of the action we could take was much longer. It needs to be 5-year goals. This was within 2 or 3 quarters. So, so that was my experience there.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. You touched on so many critical points, but one of the ones that I loved is that you made this connection back, right, around the goal setting, the goal getting, the importance of DEI, and how this all kind of, again, comes full circle to Vibe, and why Vibe is global. You can apply it. You can apply Vibe. You can apply insights to anywhere around the world to solve some of these problems, right? And so that was a great story.
Yeah, and it reminds me of this, I think we hosted Kimberly Washington Barr from the Human Capital Director from PwC. She put out that really transformational report this year on data transparency. And what I loved about what Kim was saying is that it's important to have a data, be transparent, but have a story because this is representing the lived experiences here. And it's okay to say, we got work to do, right? And you point that out, and then you go do the work. And so I was just really struck by the conversation that you and her had and that Kim had there, because I think that's more of what we need to do in the people analytics space in order to kind of get the change we're driving for.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, you know, it is about the data and the insights, but it's about the stories that go along with it. You can't overlook that those stories are what really make the data and the insights come alive. Right. Yeah. And so you can't overlook the importance of, you know, sharing some of those personal stories. So
we had, a fun conversation here, talking about vibe strategy and what we're seeing in the place. I would ask any kind of closing thoughts or any advice for people analytics professionals before I bring Al back in here so we can start doing some Q&A here.
Yeah, I would say just a couple things. One is I would say get to know your DEI partners and what their real business issues are. The insights that you guys have in your partnership is it's so critical to your business leaders. I would really make sure that I would encourage you to continue to insert yourselves in helping your business leaders really understand, how you can help them solve business problems and leverage your expertise to help us. Because like I said, Phil can see things and he can make these connections through the data that he's seeing to provide those insights to me in a very different way that becomes extremely critical in value. And then the last thing, and I said this before, but you guys are uniquely positioned to provide leadership with the most critical and helpful information that they need to solve real business problems. So continue just innovating in this space. I can't speak highly enough about my partnership with Phil, which I know translates to all the work that you are all doing on the people analytics side. And so just continue to do the hard work that you're doing there. And of course, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carin. There's been a lot of emoji applauses that I've noticed for you, Carin. We were going to have a competition about who would get the most, positive emojis. Then Al told us there is no such thing as a smiley face down or stuff like that. So I don't know.
Well, I'm seeing them go, and I'm like, oh my God, look, that's amazing. I love that. I love that from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, there are human beings there. That's not happening on its own. So, hey, thank you for a fantastically insightful discussion. And I have a host of questions, and Stacia Gar submitted a question that I'll get to in a second. But first off, I want to call out a couple things. Number one, I want to celebrate that you two are together. So to connect a diversity lead and diversity, equity, inclusion lead with a people analytics lead, I think is critically important. Oftentimes there are gaps between the two. When going back in my lived experience, there was a significant gap between the D&I leader when I was in role. And yeah, it was a sign of the times. It was the early 2000s, but here we are in a different time, different level of, not to say it's more important because it was important back then, but certainly we've had events that have elevated this to certainly a non-negotiable. So, and I also want to celebrate that you two are talking not only about, hey, doing good, but really bringing in action and accountability to where it happens. So this is where I have a question for you too. And Carin, it's going to go to you first. Is you were very open and vulnerable and humble in saying that Phil brought you ideas in terms of what data can be generated, what insights can be generated. And I've heard of the more evolved CHROs and HR leaders in general say, hey, I need more from my people analytics leaders to know what's possible, given the array of technologies that are out there, both inside and outside the organization. So my pointed question for you is, what was your discovery? How did you find Phil, or did Phil find you? How did that relationship evolve? And even a more pointed question, how would you coach other DEI leads to engage with their people analytics leader?
Yeah, it's a great question, Al. So I think part of it was just our evolution as an organization, right? When I joined the company 3 years ago, we didn't have a diversity strategy. And so we had to start thinking about this work differently. We also were at a point, I think, just in the maturity of our organization, that our HR organization was starting to expand. And we realized, and probably through leaders like Phil, realized that data was really a critical part to how we needed to solve some of our business challenges. And so I think from an organization organizational perspective, we just started to grow and mature that way, where we knew we had to start looking at data differently. And as you know, on the Workday platform, we have access to so much data, but from a new organization standpoint, we weren't using it in the right way. And so when Phil's role came up, and he really started helping us from an organizational standpoint start to look at the importance of data, that's when the organization grew. And it just so happened that DEI, there's so much data that we're always looking at, that leaning into this work was, I think, fairly easy for Phil, because it was so rich in the insights that we were going to get out of it. So I don't know what else you would add to that, Phil.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happened is the team was open to hearing what we had to say, first of all. I think that we do have a lot of data, but often not enough insights. And when we initially started partnering, it wasn't, am I just saying, Carin, here's what it is. It was like, let's sit down and say, we have some hypothesis, we're going to test, we're going to show it to you, bounce off ideas, and come back. And
I'm sure he was saying something brilliant.
I was just right there. I since he called me out, then I'll just continue where he's going, because I think he was saying that we are pushing things out that have been asked for before, so it's kind of in the known universe, and we have to be more, in my view, and in talking with Phil before on this topic, be more closer to our end customer, whether that be you, Carin, and leading D&I, or those who are affected, whether it be people managers, people leaders, and so forth. Would you echo that sentiment? Because it started when you two started actually having just exploratory discussions without really being confined by a dashboard or a report. Is that a fair statement?
That is certainly a true and a fair statement, Al, because and then it became about like, here's the data, but what questions do we need to be asking about the data? What isn't the data telling us, right? And that's where things like intersectionality came into play. It was about how do we and I think we were both open to exploring, right? We were both open to exploring, to your point earlier, what the possibilities were in this space. And I think between the two of us, we just didn't hold back. I think we were very kind of nerdy in our own little spaces around really uncovering what was happening, how we actually leverage the data. So I would certainly say that's true.
Okay. I want to stay on that, if you don't mind. And I'm sure Phil will come back, and, we got probably, 5 or so minutes left. Yeah. So many have been reluctant to have that exploratory conversation. And what I have often advised people who are starting in this work, whether it be focused on DEI or any other challenge around culture or people, is that just stop and just have a discussion about where you want to go, how you envision getting there, and then work back into the appropriate data. So I'm talking a lot these days around data appropriateness, not only data quality, but a lot of times the data that's most appropriate doesn't exist yet. We have to create it through maybe a survey, a focus group, maybe modify a process, so we're capturing this like intersectionality, what data is associated, with that. Is that what I'm hearing that you two did, is just kind of create that safe place to not get graded on the quality of the work historically, and just, interact and figure out, where you wanted to go and how are you going to get there?
Yeah, it really was. We didn't put there were no barriers in place when it came to exploring this is a new space for us, right? We said we have this opportunity to bring these two things together in terms of how we solve business problems. Let's not hold ourselves to what we know. Let's hold ourselves to how do we be open about exploring more. And so that's where I think just the creativity, and where we eventually started kind of partnering and thinking about how do we come up with a way to kind of measure parity, which is kind of where the Vibe Index came from. But it wasn't until we kind of removed those guardrails and said, let's just, let's think about this from a pie in the sky standpoint, and not just think about it from, a diversity and a representation standpoint. And that was the other thing that I don't even know, Al, if we were intentional enough about the fact that including the inclusion, belonging, and equity with the diversity piece also created that notion for us to think about the possibilities, because we had to even start looking at the intersections across belonging and inclusion and what some of the challenges and opportunities were there. And so it really did become this big ocean of opportunity for us just to, continue to push ourselves. And then I think even more important, how do we also think about how we're uncovering information and how that can help our customers as well, right?
Yeah.
So what learnings are we getting, and how can we actually share that in forums like this to be able to help others as they're challenged with or going through their own DEI journeys?
So, with that in mind, and I'm, eager to see Phil come back. I was like, I just feel like he's going to appear any moment. But there is an important thing that I want to highlight for our listeners and those who are going to, view this after the fact, is that once you have this exploratory discussion and figure out that, hey, we don't have some of the data that would be most appropriate. We have to be more creative around how we go about this. It can become overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh, we have to change that. We have to do that survey. We don't want to over survey. In other words, there's tons of excuses. There's also many things that need to be prioritized. Yeah. So how did you prioritize is the more succinct question.
Yeah, we actually kind of tiptoed into it, but we started with the belonging index, right? We knew that at some point in time, we wanted to measure belonging. And so we started there. We were already looking at a number of data points, but then when it came to DEI, we got specific and we said, let's start with belonging. And then we said, okay, we know how to measure belonging. How do you measure inclusion? How do you measure equity? And so it just continued to that thread just kind of continued. But I would say start somewhere, whether or not it's looking at your demographic information, your representation information, who's within your organization, start somewhere, right? And because as you all know, the world is your oyster in terms of all the data you have access to. So start somewhere and then build from there. The only thing that I would say also is make sure that you are connecting it to some of your more relevant business issues for your business leaders as well, right? So if diversity is one of the things that you're solving for, go after diversity first. But if it's something else, go after that thing that's really big. But start little and then continue to grow.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. As we start to wrap, I have 10 questions, and I see some others in the queue, and I'm going to have to facilitate, either get those to you or answer them, and get back to those who have asked the question. But it's essentially this: is that diversity, equity, and inclusion speaks to physical, emotional, and psychological safety, arguably at its core. And that means it's in every aspect of how we recruit talent, onboard them, develop. And so, can you explain how you've integrated? Because that's what I see. And again, I'm drawing my own narrative here a bit based on, the index. And I'm sorry, I want to say thrive because that was the end of your maturity. Right. But can you explain how you're partnering to ensure that it's not just you and Phil, that you have your host of stakeholders also involved in this journey?
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about a lot is accountability across our entire organization. We talk about accountability from our CEO to our CDO to our CHRO, all the way down to every single individual contributor. Vibe is everyone's responsibility. So as an example, I look at it from a chief diversity officer, but Phil has to look at it from a people analytics standpoint. He has to put his own lens on diversity and vibe to figure out how his organization can continue to help us do better. Same thing with our marketing organization. Our marketing organization has to think about DEI from their perspective. And so when they're putting out marketing assets as an example, they have to look through the lens before that asset goes out to say, who is this asset being targeted to, and is the messaging getting to the right audiences? And if you're trying to attract a diverse audience, but everyone within your asset is homogenous, then that marketing professional isn't looking at this in the right way. So this notion of making this about for all and every single one of our employees having to have their own lens of DEI was, I think, is what's really, to some extent, made Vibe go viral in Workday, right? Every single person, I shouldn't say every single person, a good majority of our population is really taking this seriously and figuring out what their personal role is and how you do this work. And to that psychological safety place, when you hear your manager talking about it, when you hear your leaders talking about it, you feel that you are in a safer space to be able to share authentically the experiences that you're having as well. So that whole notion around Vibe for All is really a lived experience for us in our workforce. And I think that that's been critical.
Yeah, gosh, thank you for saying that. And, I certainly celebrate what you personally have achieved in partnership with Phil and your colleagues there. I mean, Vibe is, it's a great naming convention, and it's sticky. And I imagine you have people rallying around it, and to hear that it's gone viral, it can't help but be a positive impact on your culture there in Workday, and in turn with the customers that you serve. So, thank you so much for, doing what you do and how you do it. And I am just sitting here hoping Phil's face just appears.
I'm here.
He's there. I see him.
I'm here. I see you guys. I know.
Welcome back. Hey, we got a couple more minutes. I don't know how much you caught there, but sorry that happened. Just so everyone knows, Phil and I are in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have a storm coming through, and as we were in backstage waiting for it, was like, we just want the technology to work. So I jinxed it, Phil. So it's on me, buddy.
Hey, better me than you, right? You got like 8 more hours of this to go. So
that's right. Hey, as we start to wrap, Phil, I mean, you heard the tail end of that. Any closing comments or ideas for the listeners here?
Yeah, I think, I saw that Stacia, our good friend Stacia, always asks these direct questions, as she should be. That's her job. I love their research. And I think it relates to my last statement, which is, yeah, Stacia, it's so obvious, and yet we didn't put the research and thought behind making this intersections a thing, because it's not as simple as just overlaying two things. You have to say, is this statistically different, or is this different than other people's lived experiences? Is this an anomaly? Has it been trending up or trending down? We didn't build in the systematic research. So yeah, it's obvious maybe now looking back, we should have been doing more around belonging, intersection, so forth, but we hadn't put the full weight of the research and technology and analytic power to show and feel confident that this is a thing and not like a false positive. So that's what I would say, is that, for all the people analytics leaders, like, dive right in and, like Carin says, own it, because you're a big solution to it. And I just appreciated, Carin's partnership, and Al, I appreciated what you did this last month with hosting just an event focused on this, because I think more people analytics professionals pay attention to it. We're going to make more progress faster.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And Carin, closing comments?
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to just put a hard stamp on something that Phil said, and that is, for those of you who are PA professionals, push your organizations to understand the value add that you guys are bringing. Phil's team is in so much demand right now across our entire organization. And it wasn't until we started embarking on really understanding our people analytics data and the capability that we really understood the power of what this was going to do for us. So I would just continue to push you guys and implore you to push your organizations on seeing the value add that you guys are bringing, because it is imperative that we have your voice and your expertise and your insights in on these business challenges that we're trying to solve. So thank you for the continued work. And thank you, Al, for continuing to lead this charge. It's fantastic.
Well, thanks, Carin. And on behalf, if I may be so bold, on thousands and thousands of people analytics professionals, thank you for saying that. We're going to take that little clip and put it out there, because that's going to be a good selling point for our work, no doubt. So again, super appreciate you both. Thanks for sharing and being who you are, and look forward to talking again soon. Yeah,
certainly, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, be well. Thank you.